Hey guys, welcome to the new video. This is going to be a quick hands-on video on Kafka producers and consumers. We will not cover Kafka fundamentals in this video because we have already covered them. If you are interested, please refer this video. In this video, we will focus on a simple exercise to interact with Kafka producers and consumers. So let's get started. So let's see what we are going to cover in this video. Here we have a simple exercise on Kafka producer and consumer. I will share the link of this repository so you can go through the details on your own. Now in this scenario, we have a topic named user signups. This is going to be a Kafka topic. Then the task is to develop a producer, a simple Kafka producer that will generate the events, basically user signup event, and it will send the events to this particular topic. Now this user signup event will have a set of details like user ID, username, and timestamp. So that means we will have to kind of manage a custom event. All right. It's not a simple primitive value like string or integer. We have to send a custom event. So we will also see how to create a custom event and how to work with Kafka with a custom event. Now the second step is basically to develop the consumer, which will consume these events from the same topic, which is user signups. It will consume the topics and then it will print some information on the logs as an exercise. So suppose we have Kafka up and running on our system. It could be a Docker container, it could be a cloud offering or whatever it is. We have a Kafka cluster up and running. Then we will need a component which is called producer. And this producer could be a simple Java program, a script, a microservice, or anything which is generating some events. And any entity which is generating an event and is sending that event to Kafka is called a Kafka producer. Similarly, we will have another component which is called consumer in this sense because it will read those events, it will consume those events from the Kafka. Although for another scenario, for another set of events, it can be a producer as well because it not only is consuming events from the Kafka, but maybe in some other case, it is also generating a set of events. So a consumer can be a producer or a consumer depending on the activity. All right, let me revert the direction. So we have the producer and the consumer. These are some applications which are producing the events, sending it to Kafka, then consuming those events from the Kafka. Now these producers and consumers are also called Kafka clients because they both are clients of the Kafka cluster. So when we have the producer who is interested in sending the events, how does it know where to send the events? For that, we need something called topic. So we create a topic and then the producer will send the new events to this topic like this, and the consumer will consume the events from this topic. Now the second step is how does a client know where this Kafka is running? For this, we need to configure something called bootstrap.servers, which is a property which will be passed to the consumer and the producer, basically any application which is interacting with this Kafka cluster. So we will set bootstrap.servers, we will provide this config. The next step is to develop the producer and the consumer, and for that we will use Kafka dependencies, and from those dependencies we have classes like Kafka producer, which we will use to basically develop the producer, and similarly we have another class which is called Kafka consumer. Okay, so we will use these classes in the demo to develop the producer and the consumer. Now when the producer sends an event to the topic, what it actually does, it sends something called producer record, and this producer record encapsulates the actual event, something like this. Okay, so when the producer is sending an event, it is actually sending an object of producer record, and similarly when the consumer consumes the event, instead of the raw event, what it consumes basically is something called consumer record. And this consumer record internally holds that particular event which will be extracted by the client. And the last thing to understand is when we have the event, when we send an event to the Kafka, you generally pass a key and the value. All right. Now what Kafka does, it actually converts this event to the byte form. Okay. So it needs to understand how to convert the event to the byte form. And for that, we need something called serializer and deserializer. Okay, and these are also called SERDES in short form. We don't always create the new service for each and every type because there are well-known types like string and integer, for which these serializers and deserializers already exist in the Kafka distribution, so we can simply use them. But for custom key and custom values, for custom objects, we have to develop the serializers and deserializers as well, because Kafka does not understand the custom types. We have to tell Kafka how to translate a custom type. So in this example, because we have a custom user event, which is user sign up event, you will see how do we write a custom serializer and deserializer, and how do we pass that information to Kafka. So let's start with the demo now. First of all, let's run the Kafka and create the topic. So I will use Docker desktop to run the Kafka container. And you can refer the last video in which we learned how to run Kafka using Docker desktop. All right. So we will go to the repository and I will copy the command. And before that, I will run a new Kafka container for this demo. So I will go to my images. And for this particular Kafka image, I will run a new container. And I'm going to name it Kafka exercise 1. And I will bind the same port 9092, and then I will start a new container. So the Kafka container is up. Next step is to create the topic. For that, we will go to the exec tab, which is same as running docker exec command, because we need to access the terminal. And here we will go to the opt directory, and in this one, Kafka bin. And here we have all the executables, all the scripts required to run the Kafka commands in order to create the topic. I will copy the command that I created, and in this one we have the name of the topic, which is user signups bootstrap server, because the Kafka container is running on local and the same port that we provided, which is 9092. That's all. Let me create the topic. And we have a new topic which is called user signups. The next step is to write the code for producers and consumers. So for that, we will go to the IntelliJ. So the first step is to add the required dependencies. We will not use Spring Boot or any other abstractions. It will be a simple Kafka and Java application. So let's add the required dependencies. And the main dependency that we need is Kafka clients. This one, which is coming from Kafka. And we will use the latest version at the time of recording, which is 3.9.0. That's it. Let me reload the form.xml. And in the meantime, we will also add another dependency which is required for custom serializer and deserializer, because we will use something called object mapper basically to map the POJO or the object to byte form. And this particular dependency is Jackson data bind. This one, and this is coming from Jackson core. All right. And the version that we are going to use is 2.18.1. And similarly, we need another dependency for the Jackson, and I will explain why, but let me add the dependency for now. And this is Jackson data type JSR 310, coming from the same group and using the same version. So the dependencies have been downloaded. Let's move on. In the next step, we will create the event. So let's start by adding the new event, user sign up event. And from the description, we know that we have to support a couple of fields in this event, which is going to be user ID, username, and sign up time. For that, we will use local date time, like this. Then I will add a default constructor and the parameterized constructor. Okay. I will also add getters and setters, like this. We can also use Lombok for this one, for example, but I'm keeping it simple, just the Kafka and simple Java libraries. Now, because we have this custom event, we also need to add custom serializer and deserializer. Otherwise, Kafka won't understand how to convert this object to the byte form in order to send it across the network. So let's start by adding the serializer and deserializer next. So we will name it user sign up event serializer. So in order to write the serializer, we need to implement an interface which is serializer, and this comes from Kafka itself, this one. And we need to pass the type parameter, which is going to be user sign up event in this case. All right, let's implement the missing method, and we need to implement serialize method here. The first argument or first parameter of this method is basically the name of the topic, and the second parameter is the event that it will convert to the byte array. Here it is. Now, to simplify the translation process, we will use something called object mapper. That's why we added the Jackson data bind dependency, object mapper. And let's initialize the object mapper like this. And we need to perform an additional step here, which is object mapper dot find register modules. The reason is because in this event there is a field which is local date time, which it cannot convert by default. So for that we need additional dependency, and this is the one that we added, JSR 310. And to use that dependency, we need to call this method find and register modules, which will register basically that JSR module coming from Jackson data bind, and then it will be able to convert that local date time field. All right. Now from this particular method, in order to convert it to byte array, we will simply use object mapper dot write value, and we will pass the event. That's it. We can handle it, basically the try catch. And for now, this is plain and simple. We are simply throwing the exception, but in a real scenario, we will properly handle the exception. Okay. So for this, we have the serializer ready. And in the same way, we will write the deserializer like this. And here we will do the same thing. We need to implement an interface, which is deserializer coming from Kafka. We will again pass the type parameter, which is user sign up event, and implement the deserialize method like this. And let me copy this part because we need to do the same thing with the deserializer again. And from this method, we will use object mapper dot read value. So the first parameter is the byte array because we need to convert this byte array. And the second parameter is the object type, basically that we are returning from here. And in this case, it will be user sign up event dot class. And what this deserializer will do from this byte array, it will basically create the object of user sign up event, which was sent from the producer. That is the purpose of serialization and deserialization. So we have the event ready, and we have the serializer and deserializer ready. All right, let's move on. So let's write the Kafka producer. Now we will add a new class, and we will call it simple producer. And in the simple producer, we will have a main method because this is going to be a console application. So as we learned, we use Kafka producer class to create Kafka producers basically. And so we will create an object of Kafka producer. This is coming from the Kafka itself, and it accepts two type parameters for key and value. Now in this demo, the key would be integer. We will use an integer key basically, and the value would be the event itself, which is user sign up event. Kafka producer. Now let's instantiate this Kafka producer in the main method. So we will have simple producer like this, and let's write a method where we will instantiate this Kafka producer. Now in this method, as we talked about when we started the video, that we need something called bootstrap server, because otherwise the producer or the client does not know where this Kafka is running. Then we also need to provide the serializers and deserializers for key and value. Okay, so we will provide all these configurations in this method. So what we need is we create something called a set of properties. And by using this set of properties, we pass the required configuration. .put. The first thing is we need to provide the bootstrap server. So there is this class producer config which has the constants for all these properties that we are going to use. And here we can find that one which is bootstrap server config, and this is the name of that particular property that Kafka understands, which is bootstrap.servers. But we are going to use the constant here. All right. The value would be localhost colon 9092 because that's where the Kafka is running in this case. That's where we executed or ran the Kafka container. All right. Now the second config that we need is props.put producer config dot key.serializer class config, which is basically the key.serializer, key.serializer. So we are going to use this property. And in this case, because we are going to use integer and int value as a key, so we can use an existing serializer. We don't need to write a new serializer for this one. And that existing serializer is, if we search for the class, this is something called integer serializer. And if you notice, this is coming from Kafka-clients. So we can basically copy the package path from here like this, dot integer serializer. That's it. And third property that we need to set here is producer config dot value serializer, because we also need to provide the serializer for the value. Now value in this case is the custom event that we created, so we need to pass the custom serializer that we developed in this case. And now this is going to be this serializer that we created. So let me copy the package path like this and the name of that serializer. So I will copy the name as well. And that's it. So that is the bare minimum that we need at this stage, basically where the Kafka is running and how to serialize the event, the key, and the value itself. Then when we instantiate the Kafka producer, when we call the Kafka producers constructor, we pass the configurations, the set of properties to the constructor. And that's it. So that is how we create a new object of Kafka producer. Now, once we have the Kafka producer, what we will do in this demo, we will have an interactive console application that will take some inputs from the user and then it will generate the event accordingly. It has nothing to do with Kafka. It's just to make it interactive. So we will use the same scanner class to basically take the input from the user. Like this. Okay, so the first thing it will do, it will ask for the ID, the user ID basically. Now, ideally, we will generate the user ID automatically, but in this demo application, we will take this as an input. So we will say enter the user ID. And similarly, we will also take the username as an input. And this will be simple next and string username. Okay, so we have the ID, we have the name. The next thing is basically to create the object of user sign up event, okay, and send it to Kafka. We will write another method which will be simple producer dot generate event, and here we will create the new object of user sign up event. So the first parameter is ID that we received from the user. Similarly, we will also pass the username. The third argument was the sign up time, so we can pass the current time by calling local datetime.now method. Okay, so let's create this method in the same class. And in this method, we will use the Kafka producer that we created. We will call this send method. That's how we send the event to Kafka. So you can see this send method basically accepts a couple of parameters like producer record and callback. So we will use this particular method where we will basically send the object of producer record, and this producer record will internally hold the access to the event that we generated. So let's create the object of producer record. Now this producer record accepts few parameters. The first one is the name of the topic. So in this case, the name of the topic is going to be user signups because that is the topic that we created. The second parameter is the key. And as we discussed, the key is going to be the integer type. And in this case, we can actually use the user ID because that is also integer. So what I will do, I will get the key like this. Okay. And the third parameter is the payload itself, which is going to be the event itself like this. And then we can add the message event sent. All right. Now, because this is going to be an infinite loop, so we need to terminate the loop. So what we can do here, we can ask the user whether to continue or to terminate. So we will say type C to continue. Okay. And Q to quit like this. sc.next. And here we will say if the input is quit, okay, then we need to quit the program. Exiting. And what we can do, we can actually here call the methods to clean up the producer, because in the Kafka producer class, we have methods like shutdown. So if you notice, this is a very simple program and we are not dealing with the exceptions. We are not closing or releasing the connections and so on. But in the real project, we will do that. So this is the place where you can, let's say, call Kafka producer.shutdown basically to properly and gracefully shut down the producer. And in the case of a console application, we can also register a shutdown hook where we will close the producer. But let's keep it simple. So we will simply say return, or you can say system.exit, whatever it is. So what we did in this simple producer, we are actually creating the object of Kafka producer by passing the required configurations. Okay. Then in the main method, we are taking two input values from the user ID, username. Then we are creating the object of the custom event, sending it to Kafka in the form of producer record. So this will now send the event to Kafka. Now let's write the consumer to read those events. Okay. So we will create a new class here. Simple consumer. And this will also have a main method. And in this main method, we will create the object of Kafka consumer. Here also, we need to provide the same type parameters for keys and values. So we know the key is basically integer and the value is the event, which is user sign up event. Kafka consumer. And we will write a similar method for the consumer also, which is start consumer. So let's write this method. And here also we need to provide the required configurations so that consumer knows where the Kafka is running and it can connect to the cluster. So we will have the same set of properties here also. Now in this case, because we have slightly different configurations sometimes for producer and consumer, so we have two different classes. For producer, we use producer config, and for consumer, we have something called consumer config. But some properties are actually common. So for example, for the bootstrap, we have the same property, which is bootstrap.servers. And here we will pass localhost 9092 where the Kafka is running. Okay. Then we also need to pass the key.serializer and value.serializer in this case. So in this case, it needs deserializer, not serializer. Consumer config dot key, and you see deserializer class config. Okay. And we will pass the value here because the key is integer. So we need to use the same deserializer. Let me copy the class from simple producer, this one. And the only difference is this is going to be deserializer. and it must be small like this. Then the third property is how the value will be deserialized. So for that we need value deserializer, and this is going to be the custom deserializer that we created. So we will pass the name here like this. Okay. Now in case of consumers, we also need to pass something called a group ID. We will cover the concept of group ID and consumer groups probably in the next video. So I will explain the concept there only. For now, let's pass the required config, which is consumer config dot group ID config. And I can pass a random value here. So I can say group -a, for example. And then I will create the object of Kafka consumer by passing the set of properties that we created like this. Okay. So once we have the Kafka consumer, the next thing is basically to consume the events from the topic. So what generally happens, you write a long running consumer that will keep pulling basically the topic. And in case there is a new event, it will basically read the event. So that's what we are going to do in this demo. In future, we will see variations of different types of consumers. But for this one, we will have a polling consumer. And since this is a long running, so we will have a long running loop, something like this, while true. Okay. And before we can consume the records, we need to make an additional call, which is subscribe. So a consumer must subscribe a set of topics before it can read the events from those topics. Okay. So this accepts a collection. And because in this case, we have a single event, so we will pass a single item here, which is user-signups like this. Now, what we can do here, we have the Kafka consumer now. So we can call the poll method and you can pass the duration. So let's keep it small. I can say of millis, let's say a window of 100 milliseconds. So every 100 milliseconds, it will poll the Kafka topic. And in case there is a new event, it will simply do something about it. Okay. Now, when we poll the Kafka topic, we get consumer records. And we will pass the key and value so that we don't have to typecast explicitly the same key and value like this. Because it does not know when it is polling the topic, it may read multiple records. So it returns a collection. And once we have the collection of consumer records, we can iterate on this collection. And in each iteration, we will get a particular consumer record. Again, we need to pass the key and value type like this and record on records. Now this consumer record is actually the event that we are consuming. And how do we get the event from this consumer record? We not only get the exact event, but we also get some additional metadata with the help of this consumer record. So in the demo, what we will do, once we have the consumer record, let's say we can print additional details along with the event itself like this. Record dot, we can have, let's say, partition. What is the partition from which we consume the event? Okay. Then we can also get the key because we are passing the key. So that is simple. We will get a valid key. And to access the actual event, we will call the method record.value. So we have the simple consumer ready. We have the simple producer ready. And as I mentioned earlier, we are not dealing with exceptions. We are not dealing with errors. We are not closing the producers and consumers, which we should do and which we will do in a practical project, in a real project. But for this one, we are omitting that part. Okay. So now that we have everything ready, let's verify that the Kafka is running. So we can check in the logs that the Kafka is indeed running. All right. Let's start the consumer first, because it will start polling the topic and it will simply get blocked at this point of time, which we want before we run the producer. Okay. So let's run the consumer first and see if everything is working fine. So we can see that the consumer is up. It's not doing anything because it is waiting for an event to be available on the partition. It is polling and getting blocked at this line. All right. Let's start the producer now. So we see welcome to the portal. Let's enter the user ID. We will say 101, name, dummy user, and it says that the event is sent. Now if we check the consumer, we see the consumer consumed an event. Okay, we see the partition, which is 0 because we have a single partition and partitions are 0 based indexed. So we see the partition number as 0. Then we get the key, which is 101, and the value is the event itself. Now because we don't have the toString method in the event class, so we don't see the exact details, but the important thing is we are generating the events and we are consuming the events. Now let's try to send another event. So we will see type C to continue. Okay, enter another user ID. Let's enter a new user ID, dummy user -1, and we see another event was sent. Let's check the consumer. So we see a new event on the logs. So in this video, we learned how to develop a simple producer and a simple consumer. And we also worked with Kafka topics and So in this video, we learned how to develop simple Kafka producers and consumers. We learned how to use producer records, consumer records, how to poll a topic, so on and so forth. So I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.